Morning, everyone. My name is Williams, spelled as on the screen, and I am part of the Let Us Breathe collective, and I am here to open up this press conference as we are filing a suit, protesters for Black Lives versus the city of Chicago. And this is a really important time as we collectively document the violence that took place at the hands of our city through the Chicago Police Department this summer, 2020. So just to give a little bit of context before we watch a brief video, this is a really important day. This is an important time that we're in. This summer we saw the largest uprising of political activity known in the United States, and some have argued in human history. And this suit and this summer and this year has been a time of historical accountability. And this suit is the continuance of us documenting harm. So as you hear young people, or actually multiple generations of people in the streets and in social media and in different campaigns demanding that we defund the Chicago Police Department, we need to understand that that is not a naive or an abstract demand. That is coming from generations of brutal violence and harm. And this summer has been an extreme example of that. So we are in a transformative time where we are demanding that our society move away from militarism that is deployed to protect capital and profit centers, and that we divert those resources to meet the needs of people and community. And that's what we are saying when we say defund the police. Police do not meet human needs. They just offer reactionary responses with state authority to use violent force. And that's what we saw as we saw an uprising of political activity and protest happening this summer. And we need to understand that the Chicago Police Department is uniquely and historically harmful. Not only does it have a history of torture and false confession and illegal detention and incommunicado detention. Not only is it the police department that from 2010 to 2015 killed more people than any other police department in America. Historically, over the last century, it has been brutal in terms of political repression and suppression, and violent responses to quell dissent. So this summer shows what the Chicago Police Department has been designed to do over the last 150 years. And that is, one, to be the enforcers of segregation. So the Chicago Police Department was funded and instituted and created to keep Black people out of downtown, out of places like Hyde Park, out of places like the North Side. And this summer, that history resurfaced itself. It is also, like I already said, it was designed to quell and suppress dissent. And so we look at the history of Chicago versus labor, and how that is basically how we have a police department, is to stop political action and to stop strikes. It is also, the Chicago Police Department was instituted the same year as the Indian Removal Act. And so as we saw around protecting the Columbus statue this year, the Chicago Police Department has been a part of indigenous displacement, removal, and genocide over a generational impact. And these processes have been intersecting, and they have hit the forefront this year in 2020. And this suit is a documentation, not only for this time, but for future generations that will be living in a transformed society, to understand how we got there and how we continue this everlasting fight for justice. And so I want to, before I end and we introduce this video, make sure we understand that we're using the word protester. And I think that is language that folks can understand, but we are talking about a multi-generational, intergenerational organized movement of activists, organizers, artists, educators, students, movement builders, legal professionals that have been coming together now for 6, 7 years, for many folks a decade, 20, 25 years working for justice. So this work did not come out of nowhere. This summer did not come out of nowhere. And many of the people who were violently beaten are the people that have been fighting to make sure folks have housing, have mental health care, have food, have clothing, are caretakers. This is not just, a collection of people. This is something really important that is happening that needs to be respected. And this is obviously is naming what happened in political action, but this is not about us. We as folks in movement have a responsibility and also have a privilege and access to platform and access to get journalists here and to have a press conference, because what happened this summer, what you were about to see, did not come out of nowhere. these police officers are practiced in this brutality. This was not the first time they learned to strike people, but for years, those are marginalized Black and brown people, predominantly Black people in poor parts of Chicago that don't have access to a platform that as we do. So as we took this abuse, and it is about our harm that happened to us directly, this is about exposing how violent our police department operates with Black people in our city this year and every year. And so with that being said, I want to introduce a brief video. I want to give a trigger warning that there will be images of brutality and violence in this video. Some of the people on this call will be seen being hurt. And so I just want to prepare folks for that. And then I'll come back and talk briefly about my experience and pass it along. Thank you everybody for coming this morning. And with no further ado, we can go to the video.
Chicago's protesters for Black Lives took to the street to honor the lives lost: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Rekia Boyd, Laquan McDonald. We protested and marched and rallied in the honor of thousands of Black people murdered by police across the country. We protested downtown, in Hyde Park, uptown, and at the Circle, formerly known as Columbus. We demanded justice. We demanded an end to police murders. We demanded that Chicago make Black Lives Matter, and we demanded the funding of CPD. CPD responded to our demands with brutal violence. While we were protesting to demand change, CPD used batons to beat us over the head, targeted our leaders with violent assaults, sprayed us with pepper spray and tear gas, causing us to gag and choke during the middle of a pandemic, chased us and threw us to the ground, trapped us and refused to let us go home, and even arrested some of us on false charges. The Chicago Police Department tried to silence us. They tried to stop our movement, but we can't be silenced. And on November 19, 2020, we took our fight to federal court. Protesters for Black Lives filed a historic lawsuit seeking to hold accountable the Chicago police officers who brutalized us. We are Black-led, but our collective represents the diversity of this summer's uprising. We are from every part of the city. We include experienced organizers and people who took to the streets for the first time this summer. Superintendent Brown is responsible for what happened to us. He brags on social media about standing shoulder to shoulder with police officers during a protest where CPD was aggressive and violent towards peaceful protesters. He didn't hold accountable officers caught on tape using lethal force against protesters. We're suing him to make him accountable to us. We're also demanding that the city of Chicago serve us justice. Our lawsuit tells the history of the Chicago police, a police force that has always used violence to target and silence people demanding change, including the racial unrest of 1919, 1968 Democratic Convention, and the execution of Fred Hampton. CPD's legacy of violence continues to this day. A federal court monitor has documented that CPD ignores its own rules and violates its own policies. No wonder that CPD thought that they could get away with leaving protesters beaten and bloody. They always get away with it. CPD hasn't changed for 100 years. CPD will never change. That's why we must defund CPD. That's why we need mental health providers and not CPD to show up with That's why we must establish the Peace Book, a youth-led peacekeeping initiative that's an alternative to the police. Organizers involved in this lawsuit include members from the Let Us Breathe Collective, Black Lives Matter Chicago, Good Kids Mad City, and Brighton Park Council.
Thank you for everyone for putting that video together. You will hear more from Miracle Boy shortly. I will briefly just say a little bit more, grounding myself in some of this experience, and then pass it right along. So I was abused and beaten by Chicago Police Department on May 31st, I believe is the date after the initial protest that happened downtown. And, you know, to be brief, you know, was slammed on my head onto asphalt was beaten with batons repeatedly, and to be detained and to have my hands arrested. I had a knee kneeled in my neck, very similar to the procedure that killed George Floyd. And after that, we then built a campaign to respond and to demand structural change and divestment and reinvestment in our community. And for about 2 to 3 months, had suffered physical and psychological injury and nausea from severe concussive symptoms. And there's like not much you can do except for just like, wait it out. But outside of that, I just want to name a few things that I observed. And know that there is responsibility that needs to be held, not only by our superintendent, but also our mayor, Lori Lightfoot, but it needs to also be named that they are not unique, that they are continuing a systemic practice that was practiced under Eddie Johnson and under McCarthy, as well as under Daley and under Rahm, and this is what our city does to Black people. But on that day where I was abused in Hyde Park, which is a profitable center of Chicago's South Side. A few hours earlier, I was just a few miles away on 47th Street, where I watched police passively observe as people went in and out of stores, taking things from the villa, would only just, when they got upset about what somebody said, would arrest somebody just to assert dominance every now and again, but basically looked like they were on break, watching stores go in and out of. And then a few hours later, I ended up being called saying folks needed help and there may be need for observation, facilitation, response, medic, de-escalation in Hyde Park. I pulled up thinking I would be there quickly to assist, but saw that there was a different level of militarization down 53rd Street, which is just less than a mile and a half away from where I was earlier in the day, to protect a different level of capital. And that is what I think needs to be named in terms of where and how violence happens in this city. And so within a few moments of somebody being near a makeup store, women and children that I know and love were being beaten, hit with shields and batons. People were being held in chokeholds. And then there was a distinct hyper-violent difference in protection. There were armed guards with assault rifles present to protect Hyde Park. And then after I was arrested and berated and harassed in the Chicago Police Department facility for about 7 hours, I want to name to the point of this is not just about us. There was 2 young boys who were 15 and 16 in the police department that day. And they were getting laughed at and joked with and harassed and played with, and in this silly exchange with the police officers. And some of the things the cop said was, I have sex with your mother for $20. That's what you can print. What he said is, I'll fuck your mother for $20. He said, once you eventually end up in county, they're gonna knock your front teeth out and molest you and make you carry contraband in your anus, and that you are gonna end up being raped in jail, is the way that the police officers talked to young teenagers before they called their grandmother. Those teenagers had been standing in the hallway for about 4 hours as they were talking about basketball and talking about rappers and talking about fucking their mothers while the public transportation was shut down. They were gonna have to hold them overnight because they didn't realize that they both lived in the same house with one grandmother who didn't have access to a vehicle. So for 4 hours while they're berating them, they're not even upholding the rights of what are supposed to be happening within a place that is supposed to be designated around law. So in addition to the harm that I experienced, that informs the reason why we say we need to divest resources away from this violence and into restorative justice and into community resources, I just want to re-emphasize that this is the violence that young Black people of Chicago are facing on a daily basis, and no one cares until it happens on the news. Thank you very much. My name is Damon Williams with the Let Us Breathe Collective. I encourage folks to look at the demands to defund the Chicago Police Department, namely closing Holman Square, a facility of torture, ending inhuman conduct detention, and diverting resources to mental health response. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vanessa del Valle, and I'm with the MacArthur Justice Center. Today, a team of civil rights attorneys filed a lawsuit in federal court on behalf of 60 plaintiffs. These 60 plaintiffs are multiracial, multi-generational, and come from all walks of life. They all participated in various demonstrations throughout the city during the summer of 2020, including the protests downtown over Memorial Day weekend, the protest in Hyde Park on May 31st, the protest in Uptown and Old Town on June 1st, the protest in Grant Park on July 17th, and the protest downtown on August 15th. These protests demanded justice for the thousands of Black people murdered by police and an end to the epidemic of police violence. While the plaintiffs were exercising their First Amendment rights to protest anti-Black police violence, Chicago police officers brutally hit them with batons, including strikes to the head, punched them in the face, tackled them to the ground, kneed and kicked them, dragged them through the streets, used chemical agents on them, and kettled them. Officers also falsely arrested and charged many plaintiffs with crimes or violations of municipal ordinances based on false allegations, resulting in the plaintiffs' prolonged detention and CPD lockups. Officers also damaged or stole many plaintiffs' property, including their bikes, backpacks, phones, and eyeglasses. Throughout the summer, the officers' animus against the plaintiffs was unmistakable. Officers were aggressive, rude, and disrespectful to the plaintiffs. They called plaintiffs vile and vulgar names and used misogynistic and homophobic words. The officers also targeted some of the plaintiffs who served as protest marshals, legal observers, medics, or leaders with the most brutal violence, apparently as part of a strategy to quell the protesters' free expression. These Chicago police officers clearly violated the plaintiffs' constitutional rights under the First, Fourth, and 14th Amendments. The plaintiffs are now seeking money damages for the abuse and trauma they endured because that is the only tool available to them to hold the Chicago police officers accountable for their actions this summer. Now I'll turn it over to Amika.
Hi, my name is Amika Tendaji, Amika Tendaji. I am with Black Lives Matter Chicago. I did want to say that I was also in Hyde Park, also beaten by the police, and a moment I had of standing face to face from an officer with blood all over his sleeve that had to be the blood of one of my friends. One of my friends who came up to support a very chill and relaxed action and just support people exercising their rights in the city that day. This lawsuit is really important for us as a tool of trying to hold Chicago Police Department accountable, as a tool of awakening Chicago to demand that this shouldn't happen anymore. For this iteration of this fight, this push for this fight, Damon's right. It took for people who knew a lot of people, knew a lot of organizers, or people who were organizers and knew a lot of people in positions. And this is happening every day. This is somebody, is being brutalized, and we shouldn't allow that anymore. Particularly because it costs. So we're spending over $4 million a day on this kind of brutality. We don't, quite transparently tally up all the lawsuits, so we're not exactly sure how much that is, but it's far too much. This is a pandemic. Black folks have been hit really hard during this time, and there are public mental health services needed. There is, access to making sure that everybody has the resources they need, and housing for sure. And we're prioritizing spending that money on policing, on locking up predominantly Black then brown folks. It's immoral. Our budget is a moral document reflecting the values and priorities of this city. And right now, it looks like we prioritize like the decimation of Black communities. We need to reverse those priorities and focus on systemic issues and how we can really help invest in communities and not police.
Good morning.
Thank
Sorry, Vika, were you done? Good morning, everyone. I'm Sheila Betty. I'm director of the Community Justice Clinic at the Northwestern School of Law. And as you have already heard, this lawsuit is historic, and it's historic because of the scale of the harm. Hundreds of officers are responsible for the harm you heard Mika and Damon talk about. But this lawsuit is also historic because it demonstrates that past is prologue. We know well in this city that police lawlessness and racism and violence and corruption is part and parcel of the Chicago Police Department. In 1919, there were uprisings on the streets of Chicago, and the Chicago Police Department responded to those uprisings with brutal force. In the aftermath of those uprisings, there was a report that said the city of Chicago Police Department needed to clean house. 100 years later, we have new uprisings, but we have the same Chicago Police Department that has failed to clean house. Just 5 years ago, Chicagoans took their demands for justice and accountability in the Chicago Police Department to the streets in the names of Laquan McDonald and Rekia Boyd. And one of the things that resulted from those uprisings is a federal consent decree. This is a federal consent decree that Mayor Lori Lightfoot talks about as part of her plan to change the Chicago Police Department to keep people safe from police violence. But that consent decree was no antidote to the poison that infects the Chicago Police Department. Let's be very clear that the violations, you've heard about the violations that are contained in this complaint. They're pervasive, they're systemic, reflect just how entrenched lawlessness is in the Chicago Police Department. Chicagoans who are part of what has been called the largest social justice movement in the world took to the streets this summer to protest law enforcement brutality, violence, and racism. CPD responded with brutality, violence, and racism. Chicago Police Department's protest response revealed its propensity to engage in the exact same behaviors that sparked these worldwide protests. The city of Chicago itself is directly responsible for the injuries that are detailed in the complaint and that you've heard about here today. And so is Superintendent Brown. He bragged to the media that he was shoulder to shoulder with police officers during one of the actions where CPD was most violent. Superintendent Brown failed to take any action to stop his officers from brutalizing protesters and violating their First Amendment rights. So not only will this lawsuit demand accountability from the individual officers who engaged in such violence and brutality, but it also will demand accountability from the city of Chicago and the superintendent himself. This lawsuit, this complaint, contains some of the best evidence for the movement to defund CPD. The intransience of the Chicago Police Department, its refusal to respect the sanctity of Black and brown lives, and the hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayer dollars that are going to go into defending the indefensible. Strong evidence that CPD must be defended. This lawsuit should be a call to action to the mayor, to city council, that it must heed the demands to defund the Chicago Police Department. Before I end, I just want to give two quick shout outs. I'm going to give a shout out to the plaintiffs who are not on this Zoom call, who took to the streets this summer. Your commitment to the movement for Black Lives inspires us. We're honored to represent you. And I also want to give a shout out to law students at the Northwestern School of Law for all the work they did to get us to this day. I'm now going to turn it over to Michelle.
Actually, I think it's Miracle next.
Oh, sorry, Miracle.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Miracle Boyd. I'm a youth organizer with Good Kids Mad City, and I'm here in this lawsuit because the officer who punched me needs to be held accountable for his actions. I was at the protest, and I did nothing to deserve a punch in the face and have my teeth knocked out. But my only weapon was my voice, and that was what I was using. So I think that it is imperative that the city council our Peace Book campaign that G can't see it. And the Peace Book, if you don't know what that is an initiative that we want to use on the south and west sides of Chicago, who go through the most violence in our communities, and we want to make peace our essential plan to not call police. So restorative justice practices during our Peace Book campaign. So if you don't know what the Peace Book is, I would say that you need to get in tune, and that's about it.
and I believe I'm next. So my name is Michelle Zacharias. I'm a writer and a community organizer. I'm here today because it's my duty to speak out against what I experienced on July 17th, 2020 at the Black and Indigenous Unity Rally. In my 31 years as a journalist and a Chicago resident, I have never witnessed such blatant violence and aggression as I did from the Chicago Police Department on that day around the Grant Park Columbus statue. I'm appalled and I'm disgusted by the targeted attacks that I witnessed towards Black and brown youth, women, queer individuals, and disabled folks like myself. It was evident that our freedom of expression was deliberately violated, and we were corralled like cattle while the police pepper sprayed and beat us. I think it goes without saying that for far too long, the police have evaded accountability for their actions, and they will continue to disregard our human rights until we speak up about it. So in order to establish a foundation of a future where Black and Indigenous people are not constantly in fear for our lives, we must challenge the corrupt and violent policies in place at the Chicago Police Department. We acknowledge that this is just one of many fights that are happening all over the nation right now, and we stand in solidarity with other victims and survivors of police violence around the world. We are at a critical point in our country's political ethos right now, and we intend to be on the right side of history for this. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joey Mogul, and I'm a lawyer at the People's Law Office, and I'm a part of a team of lawyers from the People's Law Office who are both honored and humbled to be representing the individuals who filed this lawsuit today. This lawsuit contains a litany of grotesque and egregious violence that was meted out by Chicago police officers against protesters who were opposing this very racist police violence that has just been endemic to the city of Chicago and across the nation. Today, the mayor and city council, they are at a turning point. They can decide whether they are going to defend the indefensible that is part of this lawsuit, or they can decide that they want to turn the page and start on a new path forward. I previously was involved in the class action litigation in 2003 regarding the anti-war massive demonstration in downtown Chicago that ended with Chicago police officers detaining over 800 individuals, beating several of them, and then arresting and charging several of them as well. That litigation, the city of Chicago chose to defend and pay outside counsel, and they litigated it for 9 years before we reached a historic settlement. All told, that litigation cost the city of Chicago and used $15 million of our taxpayer money. We are hearing from the organizers, from the folks who protested today, that we are in desperate need of resources for our schools, to educate our children. We need healthcare. We need mental health resources. We need better public transportation. The money that we have in this city is limited, and we need to spend it towards supporting the material needs of Chicagoans' lives. And we do not need to continue to defend the indefensible, which is these lawsuits defending police officers who engage in this egregious violence. And we also need to figure out new pathways forward so that we can support our individuals and make us all free from safety and violence. And we're hearing loud and clear that the police department is not part of that path. And so we are here in this lawsuit seeking redress for the people who were injured, and we are ringing the bell, and we are calling on our elected officials to go down a new path, one that supports all Chicagoans, one that will work towards towards Chicagoans' freedom from safety and violence, and one that will not continue to defend the indefensible.